team, I see it is 2 minutes after 11. And Mona, you are more than welcome to start if you're ready.
Thank you, Sadai. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our Fireside Chat on enhancing security and efficiency in employee onboarding. It's wonderful to see so many joining us for this crucial conversation. I'm thrilled to introduce our host, Servaas du Plessis, XTND's visionary CEO and co-founder, leading our charge into safer and more efficient workplace practices. Alongside Servaas, we have the very distinguished Farhad Bhyat, CEO of Farosian, our strategic partner and a leader in digital risk management. To kick off things, Servaas will take us through the unseen danger in hiring. He will also shed some light on forces such as fraud and corruption. How can that infiltrate our workplaces if we're not vigilant with our hiring processes? Then Farhad will chat us through the complex landscape of social and digital media risk, offering his invaluable expertise on safeguarding our businesses in the digital age. Without further ado, let's get comfortable. We're about to explore some more pressing issues and innovative strategies in the world of employee onboarding and security. Enjoy.
Thank you, Mona, and a very good morning to everyone on the webinar. I think if there's one word dominating the news headlines over the last 12 years, it will literally be a toss-up between load shedding and state capture. Both obviously as a result of corruption, and we've seen it from one print to digital media expose to the next, from the Zondo Commission revelations to the eventual greylisting of South Africa by the FATF. But corruption is something we've become all too familiar with, and it affects us in ways we often don't even realize. I want to assure you, though, that corruption is not a victimless crime, and I hope to shed some light not only on corruption hotspots and issues we face, but also how we at XTND have and how you can use innovative tools like social media background screening in our combined endeavors to combat this scourge. I think it's important to understand the corruption crisis in South Africa. It is pervasive, touching every area of society. It's not just an abstract concept. It is something that we see manifest in everyday life. Maladministration, fraud, bribery, procurement irregularities, you name it. We even saw the neglect and abuse of the frail and elderly, which illustrates some of the ways that we are impacted. Looking at some statistics, and I don't want to bore you with figures, but since 2012, Corruption Watch has received almost 47,000 complaints of alleged corruption by whistleblowers. That is, if you calculate it backwards, an average of 11 reports per day. Even after the Zondo Commission and all the exposés, more than 2,100 were reported last year. And these figures are not just mere numbers or boring statistics. They reflect how deeply rooted the problems in our country is. So we ask what the impact of corruption is. And as I said earlier, it affects us on so many levels that we don't even realize. And it doesn't just erode trust in our institutions, it also has and continues to have a real tangible impact on the lives and livelihood of all South Africans. For example, take load shedding, which has become our norm. Yes, the last 3 months we've been blessed without sitting in the dark. But apart from that, being without water for days, sometimes even weeks, nothing new or strange to us. We are not even talking about the deterioration of all the infrastructure like the roads, the railways, and many other things for which we, most of us on this call, diligently pay our taxes. Just a few examples. If you take the gas explosion in the city of Joburg, which occurred at the beginning of August last year, it is still not fixed. I see in the media that 19 million have been squandered by a tender of almost 200 million, and very, very little was done to fix it, but the road is still not accessible. Another example is the massive sinkhole that appeared in January 2022 next to the N1 highway in Pretoria. There's still a gaping hole, and the rehab of the road only started about 18 months later in July 2023, at which time they estimated that it will take 2 years to complete. I think importantly, we should not be fooled thinking that this is a government or local government problem. It's a rampant problem across all the sectors. And you see it in mining, telecoms, retail, information technology, and even in non-profit organizations, and as I mentioned before. And it's a clear indication that no area is immune. We think about all the challenges faced by these sectors when we see big businesses like Steinhoff employing and literally leaving thousands of people without a job. We realize that corruption doesn't steal money or resources. It steals our safety, our opportunities, and our future. And one may ask, what is the role of law enforcement in all of this? And the harsh reality in our country is that we can't rely on law enforcement to protect us. There are literally weekly reports of corruption in every institution meant to uphold the law. By its own admission in the recent parliamentary feedback by the South African Police Service, the statistics released indicates that 40% of corruption in SAPS involves the dereliction of their duties. 31% abuse of power, almost 30% involves bribery. And there's even a small percentage related to sex for jobs or promotions, or as we better know it nowadays, sextortion. So the very people that we are supposed to trust to protect us contribute to the very problem they are supposed to fight. And it creates uncertainties in communities. We feel unsafe in our own backyards, and then we experience and see that there's no real urgency to address these failures, adding to the frustration, the fears, and the intolerance by the people of our country. I think social media plays a massive role, and we can ask what I can do to affect change. How do we tackle this widespread issue as a community? And I read a LinkedIn article, and I want to quote Bruce Whitfield when he talked about starting his first job at a recent seminar and how things have changed in terms of trust. And I'm not going to go through the entire speech, but to quote, he said, "We are now navigating an area where disinformation is rampant and trust is so easily eroded. The only thing you have in this world is your reputation, your brand equity, your reliability, your trustworthiness, all of which hinge on what people think of you." Now, I think many of us on this call are not as familiar as the younger generation with social media, and probably only limited use of it because we didn't grow up with it like many other youngsters nowadays. XTND as a company solves for several customers in terms of intelligence, and that ranges from anti-money laundering, terrorist financing and background screening, through criminal record and qualification checks. And since 2023, we also included social media screening via our VeriX platform in partnership with Farosian. Social media screening is a dimension of added intelligence, and it's gaining prominence globally in terms of people vetting. And whether that relates to directors' checks in terms of procurement, onboarding, or general screening of prospective employees in the recruitment process, or even considering a non-executive director to your board of directors, it is a very crucial and important tool. The immediate question that comes up is, how can social media help me fight corruption, or help us fight corruption? And I think there's three distinct things, or four distinct things we need to consider. Obviously, social media, as you all know, is a goldmine of information. It provides insights into someone's character, their associations, the behavior, in ways that traditional vetting processes most often overlook. It illustrates lifestyles and proactively identifies potential risks, especially in terms of the people you surround with, and if you want to appoint those people in positions of power. And last but not least, it holds crucial evidence, especially of deception and even the involvement in criminal activities. I mean, just look at Hamilton and Glover, who caught the attention of the Special Investigations Unit when he bragged about 7 multi-million rand cars he owned on social media. It was obviously subsequently confiscated and sold on auction. They recovered, I think, 20 million of the 172 million ill-gotten gains that he got from tender corruption in the PPE period. So by example, if someone is being considered for public office or key role within a state-owned entity or in your company, comprehensive background screening that includes their social media activity could reveal red flags such as associations with known corrupt individuals, activities that displays a lack of integrity, or even direct involvement in corrupt or fraudulent activities. I think it's a preemptive measure that could be crucial in ensuring that those who are appointed to positions of power have the moral fiber, integrity, and the know-how to fulfill their duties without succumbing to corruption and fraud. The most recent criminal conviction of a senior ex-Brasso official is a very good example. Qualifications, experience, his work history were fabricated to earn several million rands at one of the state-owned entities. And if a simple social media check was included in the background screening, the discrepancies between his LinkedIn profile and his CV presented to the company would have raised the red flags. Just on a side note, I think everybody, or not everybody, know that in terms of the new NQF Act, it's actually a criminal offense to lie on your CV. And the same applies to when you lie on your qualifications on social media platforms like LinkedIn, Facebook, or any other social media platform, for that example. We absolutely need reforms, and we need a much bigger emphasis on accountability. And while social media screening is a powerful tool, it is just one part of the larger reform that we need. I mentioned procurement earlier in the discussion. I think it's one of the biggest corruption risks in society today. And to address this, we need comprehensive reforms to increase both transparency and accountability. Maybe we should consider incentivizing whistleblowers or taking real action against perpetrators like the ex-Brasso executive. And these are ways that will certainly encourage more people to come forward when they see wrongdoing. The implementation of a e-procurement strategy, not only in state-owned entities and government, but also in private companies, making it more transparent, and I think it will also reduce the opportunities for corruption. And these forms are not just ideals, but I think essential for rebuilding the trust in our state and organizations. As we stand at a critical juncture, we must remember that combating corruption is not a job for law enforcement or only for the leadership. It's a collective responsibility that falls on each and every South African. And our responsibility extends beyond this. Our accountability begins with each of us and the way we act, the choices we make today, the things we say and post on social media today literally will determine the future of our country. And we must remain vigilant and proactive, using every tool at our disposal, including, as I said, social media background screening, that can help us to prevent corrupt practices before they take root. I want to introduce you to Farhad Bhyat, the CEO and founder of Farosian, and one of our key partners in fighting corruption and crime. And Farhad's going to give you a more in-depth view of the power of social media and digital media screening. And I really look forward to your contributions, Farhad. So without further ado, over to you.
Thank you very much, Servaas, and good morning to everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate your time. I know your time is valuable, and I'm very humbled by the fact that each one of you have decided to give us an hour worth of your time today. So hopefully we can impart a little bit of knowledge and maybe just upskill you a little bit with some areas that may not have been considered previously. As Servaas and Mona said, my name is Farhad Bhyat. I'm one of the co-founders and the CEO of Farosian. Farosian has been in existence since 2015, so it's almost a decade that we have been going. We are the first and pioneering company in the space of social and digital media screening and risk mitigation throughout Africa. We've also grown ourselves to being one of the blue chip companies on a global perspective, where at the present moment, there are 30 different countries worldwide where our products are consumed in. Now, I think I'd like to start with the most common question that we receive is, what actually is social media background screening, or screening as a whole? A lot of people tend to think that it's a form of stalking or being creepy towards people. But I believe that this is something that's more about semantics and how we phrase things. There's the old saying that I'm sure we've all heard, which is, it's not what you say, it's how you say it. So if you say social media screening is stalking, then it is stalking. But you could also describe it in a slightly different way. You could think or voice it as being a measurable due diligence of people. And I say that with a very specific purpose. When we look at our own personal lives, most people do some form of social media screening on other people when it comes to our personal and intimate relationships. For someone who is single and looking to fill the position of romantic partner, within the first 2 or 3 days of meeting, one or both people have vetted one another through their Facebook accounts, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok accounts, whichever profiles they might have. And the reason they do that is because they are looking for information. They're looking for green flags and red flags around someone. So the concept of social media screening is not new. What we have done is we have professionalized it. We've professionalized it to the point where one of the biggest misconceptions is that people have the assumption we are solely looking for red flagged content and behavior of an individual. That what is it of anybody's interest or business that somebody has a few drinks on a Thursday or Friday night or over the weekend? And you know what? You're right. It's not anyone's business. Our process, the process that should be followed, is a 360-degree view. If you're reporting on and flagging negative content or red flagged content, you also have to flag positive content and behaviors. So every single person who does have negative behaviors also has positive behaviors, and that needs to be reported on. It's effectively not a witch hunt. There is no ulterior motive of going through a witch hunt to try and uncover something to be judge, jury, and executioner towards somebody. It's a reporting process to uncover and report on the full picture around a person. Now, I know from a South African and African context, the concept of social media screening is still quite new. From our perspective and a global scale, I'll just give you some basic numbers that we have experienced. During our first year of operations in 2015, we sold 150 checks, a measly 150. Fast forward 8 years later, for the 2023 calendar year, we provided in excess of 200,000 checks to the local market alone, where we see a year-on-year growth of 30% upwards every single year. So the concept and the utilization of the product is growing and growing quite aggressively. It's growing at a far higher rate than any other form of compliance check or background screening check that you can find on a global scale. as the usage of social media and digital usage has increased over the years, so has the need for vetting and screening of people from a digital perspective. And I'll give you some quick examples. During 2020, during COVID and lockdown, at the beginning of February, March 2020, TikTok as a platform had roughly 100 million users. Within 3 months, they grew to over 1 billion users. If Facebook was a country, it would be the biggest country in the world by population. And interestingly, China and India wouldn't even be second or third because TikTok and Instagram would be above them. The amount of information and data that can be crunched and analyzed through social media is actually mind-blowing. There are over 6,000 tweets that are posted every single second on a global scale. Every single minute that goes by, 694,000 hours of YouTube content is consumed on a global scale. So the usage can never be disputed, and the amount of information available can never be disputed. Now, one of the biggest challenges that we as a business experience, and we've seen this with our partnership with XTND, is there's a belief that organizations have that they can conduct this practice internally. So we like to call our biggest competitor is the belief of internal capability, not another organization. Now, each one of those, whether it's internal or external, has their own set of pros and cons associated with them. And obviously, I would be biased by running an organization that provides the external side, but I will try my best to be as impartial as possible. From an internal perspective, the biggest benefit is cost saving, or assumed cost saving, should I say. It is time consuming, and it is subjective in terms of the person conducting the assessment. It is not measurable, and it opens up an enormous amount of potential legal liability and complications, as well as potential lawsuits. In a modern world where we have roughly 55% of the global workforce that are millennials, and within the next 5 years, 35 to 45% of the workforce will be Gen Zs. We have 2 generations of people who have grown up on social media and a generation who have lived their entire lives with social media present. Now, these are people who are very savvy, as Servaas was mentioning earlier. And these are people who know or believe they know how to hide their profiles, how to have alias accounts, troll accounts. So conducting this internally adds an additional layer of complexity in being able to find and identify these profile accounts, alias accounts that people may hold. So from what I can see, the only real benefit from an internal utilization of social media screening is a financial cost. But that can be balanced out when you take into account the time allocation cost associated with it. From an external perspective, the biggest pitfall is the outsourcing and the cost, the financial cost associated with it. When this, though, is an external exercise, we have the benefit of addressing all of the cons from the internal side. It is a process that is measurable, it is standardized, and very importantly, is aligned to legislation. Now, there are numerous bits of legislation that govern the use of social media in every country, including South Africa, where the large majority of the population is completely unfamiliar with what bits of legislation are applicable. To give you a little bit of insight into that, most people would assume it would be something like POPI, which you would be correct in. But there are additional bits of legislation, like the recently published Hate Crimes Bill, the Cyber Crimes Act, the Road Traffic Management Act, the Criminal Procedures Act, and the one that most people are completely unaware of is the Film and Publications Act. Because utilizing social media, you are a publisher of content. And that doesn't only relate to the content that you post. It also relates to likes, sharing, and retweeting of other people's content. By doing so, you are also a republisher. So having an understanding of the legislative framework is a very important part of the process. And as I said before, the expertise involved in finding and matching accounts. One of the largest pros of the outsourced model is the objectivity involved, as well as the standardization and the measurable metrics that are able to be put into place. If you are just randomly scrolling through someone's profile, can you assign a score to determine why this person's risk is higher than that person's? That becomes a very difficult process, and that becomes a process which is very difficult to defend when legal undertakings become prevalent. Now, when we look at social media screening in comparison, and I don't actually like that word, but in comparison to traditional types of background checks, I don't believe that it should be compared to them, but it should be a value addition to them, because each type of background screening check has a purpose. It has a place. But the large majority of background checks are very static. They don't move very often. Very few people will ever have a criminal check that will move frequently in terms of convictions or information being added to it. The closest comparable check would be some form of credit check, where that changes on a monthly basis potentially. Now, with the high amount of information being published, posted, and engaged with on a daily basis, social media moves exponentially quicker. The average person on Twitter posts roughly 60 tweets per month. So every two tweets almost every day. Each tweet can move a person's risk profile. Each post that a person engages with can move a person's risk profile. So it is a very quickly changing landscape. So it's not to say that it is more important than any one of the other background checks, but it is one that does move significantly more and significantly quicker. It is also a check that is able to take qualitative information based on people's activity and quantify it. Now, things like criminal checks are very black and white. It is a yes or a no. And if it's a yes, it is some detail on why of the yes. Whereas a social media risk assessment of an individual requires more interpretation, and interpretation linked to scientific backing. So the amount of information and insight that can be derived from performing social media screening is highly value adding, and it allows to be able to see the true person behind the CV, behind the KPIs, behind the other background screening checks. It is the only place where we can have a year, 5 years, 10 years, or 15 years worth of true behavioral analysis of a person, unless you are a Kardashian and you've had TV cameras following you around for the last 15 years, and it's openly available to everybody. Now, social media checks play a vital role in terms of safeguarding and mitigating an organization's reputation. It's not just relating to the content that organizations post, but what we have is we have a situation where companies suffer the burden based of the activity and behavior of people within the business. And we've seen this in many, many occasions. We just have to think back to instances such as Penny Sparrow, such as Chris Hart, Valapi Kumalo, Adam Katsavelos. These are all people who committed offenses that went viral and indirectly landed up causing brand image, reputation, and revenue loss for their associated employers and or businesses. Okay. You look at somebody like Adam Katsavelos's incident. He was an owner in a family business of sauces. Overnight, multiple restaurant chains canceled their association and procurement requirements or purchasing habits to not purchase from their business anymore. Further to that, his wife worked at Nike South Africa, and they had to close down one or two of their stores for about a week because of physical threats. And that impacts their earnings. It impacts the reputation associated with those businesses. So the people within our businesses have an indirect consequence, positive or negative, towards the businesses in either strengthening the brand image, reputation, and revenue, or taking away from it. Now, adding social media screening to your recruitment process is a fantastic exercise to start implementing within the business. But then you have the added risk of the people currently in the business. There is a company that we work with quite closely, and on starting to screen their existing employees, one of the things we found is that they had a receptionist who had 1.5 million followers on Twitter. Now, just that alone, I'm not saying it's a good thing, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It can be one or the other, depending on the activity relating to them. But having some sort of baseline for each individual currently within the business and coming into the business helps you to mitigate risks and make better decisions. Effectively, social media screening adds a different dynamic that hasn't been able to be provided before in terms of data-driven decision-making relating to people. Now, we've seen some very, very interesting things over the years with regards to the reports that we've done and the behavior of people. And most people think when I start talking about these things that I'm making them up. And sadly, I wish I was. But I'll give you some brief examples. And these aren't cases that would have been publicized. These are everyday run-of-the-mill report requests that we get on a daily basis. One of the things that we've seen an increase in since 2021 is the number of people who are matched to being content creators on OnlyFans. Now, any form of sex work in South Africa is illegal, and OnlyFans itself is illegal in South Africa. And that becomes a significant problem. Now, what I'm about to say links back to the traditional background checks. A criminal check will reflect something that is a conviction if it is positive. Social media activity can reflect criminal activity that has not been convicted as yet, such as sex work of OnlyFans. We, unfortunately, relatively frequently come across profiles where people are selling drugs through Twitter accounts, through Instagram accounts. And I'm not talking about selling marijuana. I'm talking about selling cocaine, heroin, tick, serious drugs that cause huge amounts of damage. We've even done reports on people who have checked in at the police station and commented saying that they were arrested for drinking and driving and possession of 1 kilogram of cocaine. So you see the less severe in the public's eyes of instances of racism or homophobia, which we do not believe are actually less severe. But then you see the harder line aspects, such as sex work, prostitution, selling drugs online, drinking and driving. There was an exercise that we actually did just over a year ago for one of the e-hailing providers. We screened 40,000 of their drivers. And what we found is that 8% of their 40,000 drivers that we screened were posting content admitting to drinking and driving and speeding. Now, as a person who has used and does use e-hailing services, I think that's a very, very concerning aspect to have. There are numerous instances where we've seen. I'll highlight a very brief case study of something we were directly involved in through one of our clients. One of our clients, roughly 5 years ago, contacted me very urgently on a Thursday evening because one of their employees went relatively viral on Twitter relating to a post, a comment that she made on Facebook. And the post had something to do with, I feel very uncomfortable actually saying it, but she was having an argument with a relatively known comedian. And the comedian happens to be Jewish. And her comment read, and I'm paraphrasing slightly, read something to the effect of, Hitler should have done a better job with all of you. Somebody screenshotted that, posted it onto Twitter. People on Twitter found her LinkedIn profile, and her LinkedIn profile said that she was an employee at Sasol, which she was not. Going back to what Servaas mentioned earlier about CV fraud being a criminal offense now. What happened is that she is a consultant, or was a consultant, to Sasol, and listed Sasol as her employer on her LinkedIn profile. Sasol contacted our client and said to them, fix this, or we are pulling 20 million Rand worth of business that we send you annually. So we're starting to now see the linkage and the consequence. One comment on Facebook finds its way onto Twitter. The person is hunted down on LinkedIn, has an association with Sasol, and it can cost somebody 20 million Rand worth of revenue. All because of just one moment of one post. Okay. There are numerous instances that I can share with you, but I don't want to make everybody here think that I'm making things up. So what I'd like to get into is trying to explain to everybody, how can we become more proactive in terms of this space? Now, the social media area and digital media area is highly complicated. It's extremely difficult, it's extremely complex, it's extremely intricate to be able to navigate. But I'll try my best to give you some information to help you navigate this field a little bit better. Making use of social media screening is but one part of the process. It is a almost monitoring tool. But in order to monitor, you also need a set of governance rules to apply. And that governance tends to come through your social media policy. And that is the first place that most businesses are lacking in. Most organizations' social media policy is a subsection of their IT policy, and it specifically relates to hardware and or bandwidth usage. Or it is a subsection of the marketing policy, specifically relating to outgoing activity and content of the organization. Making sure that you have a robust policy that is adopted and accepted by all employees is your starting point. But if you have this policy and governance in place, and you have a monitoring tool in terms of screening, you also need to be able to provide training. And the analogy I like to use very often is that the space of social media is very similar to a car. Just because we have a car and drive a car on a daily basis or a frequent basis does not mean that you know how to service it. You can change the brake pads. You know where the spark plugs are. You know where the sump is. Just because you use something doesn't make you an expert in it or know the intricacies involved with it. A lot of people like to believe that just because they have Facebook and they use it, or they have LinkedIn and they use it, that they understand the deeper complexities involved with it. And that is simply not the case. So by providing training to the people within the business and adding it to part of your induction process, you are now creating an ecosystem where you can properly and effectively mitigate the risks associated with social media and the risks that the people within the business and future people coming into the business can have towards the business. Now, social media policies will add a very strong layer for you in terms of additional protection, but I do not recommend implementing a stock standard policy. It is something that is unique. Each business has its own DNA. Each business's operations, protocols, and industry is different, and your policy needs to be aligned to that. The social media space is extremely difficult, as I said, to mitigate and to navigate, and it provides a set of risks that we have never seen before, and we're only starting to see more frequently now. But there is a historical track record of people breaching these areas going back many years. So the quicker we provide training and the quicker we start addressing it within the organization, and the quicker we start utilizing the enormous amounts of information and data that is available to us, the more value we can extract from it. As Servaas was saying, for almost 3 years now, Farosian and XTND have been working very closely together. Our partnership has reaped some amazing results towards things like lifestyle audits, forensic investigations, traditional background screening for recruitment services, where the end user customers have been able to extract this value and to be able to make better decisions for their own businesses. That is about all that I have for everybody. If there are any questions, I'm very happy to take on any questions or to address any queries that anybody may have.
Farhad, yes, if I may open with one question. We recently worked on a case where a very prominent private school head boy was accused of sexual misconduct. And through, obviously, with permission of him and his parents, we did a deep dive in terms of the social media. And unfortunately, we discovered quite disturbing aliases under which it was actually pointing towards him more probably guilty of what he was accused of than not. I think a lot of us on the call have children, or we have family members with children. How do we prepare and protect our children from putting themselves at risk for the future? I mean, we've seen it with several politicians now, videos that they posted 10, 12, 15 years ago that's now coming back to haunt them. But how do we manage our children? Because obviously the access to social media is not something that you can control unless if you don't give them a mobile device. But is there any advice for parents and people with younger generations still in their home to help them navigate this difficult area?
It's a very good question, Servaas, and it's a very difficult question to answer. My 2 cents on the subject is this: try and restrict your children's activity as much as possible, but at the same time, it's all about education, just as I mentioned with regards to people within the business of upskilling everyone. Teaching and training your children is very, very, very important. But teaching yourself first is even more important. As we all know, that children will learn based on observation. And if they are seeing their parents, their brothers, sister, older people who they look at from a authoritative perspective, or that they respect, behaving in a certain way online, they will replicate that behavior. Teaching them the ins and outs, teaching them the real risks of things like human trafficking, right? Human trafficking is a huge thing. It doesn't really happen on the side of the street anymore. You mentioned the head boy. There was another instance that we worked together with Servaas of a young lady that was thought to have been kidnapped about 2 years ago. And we managed to track down a lot of information purely because of her social media activity, right? Every picture that you post, there's metadata included into it. Teaching your children what they should post, what they should not post. Also, from a parent's perspective, please do not take pictures of your kids on their first day of school outside the school. There's identifying elements in the background. Don't take pictures of their report cards and post it online. Don't take pictures inside of your home, because the GPS coordinates of your home can be extracted from those pictures. So the first step is to make sure that you yourself as a parent are behaving in a way that protects yourself and your child. Then you can start upskilling, educating, and teaching your child to behave in a way that doesn't come back to, quote unquote, bite them in the backside 15 years later, 20 years later. This head boy that you've spoken of, that content is going to be there forever. So unfortunately, it's going to affect job prospects, career opportunities later on in life. That's very sad for somebody who is 17, 18 years old, or now 19, 20 years old. So it kind of links back to that very old expression. You've got, what is it, 10 seconds to make a good first impression? But now your first impression is there forever.
Yeah.
So one, we have to take it for ourselves and almost be role models for our own kids and younger people before we can start to have that expectation of them. But while we are doing that, to teach them effectively.
And Farhad, we spoke earlier in the week specifically around legislation coming to the fore around the world. You specifically mentioned about legislation recently published in France around publishing stuff on your children.
Yeah.
Maybe you can just, as a matter of interest, share that, because I think it will probably be somewhere in our future considered in South Africa as well. We're always a few years behind the Americas and the Europes. But maybe just a quick overview of the legislation that was implemented.
That's a great point. I wish I could take credit for uncovering that, but that's my partner and co-founder, Sinead. She found this out. So France is one of the most proactive countries in the world in terms of this specific area. They've put through legislation where parents who are posting content of their kids as some type of influencer account to generate an income, right? We see a lot of this throughout the world in different countries. They actually have to register with the French government that this account is for this purpose. And the French government has mandated that there has to be a trust account set up. So all revenue generated from that account, excluding expenditure for running the account, has to go into that trust account. So the parents don't use their kids as income generating vehicles, as we're seeing, where minors are being exploited by their own parents for revenue generation purposes. I do think and believe and agree with the legislation that the French have put through, that this has to be policed, because children are being exploited from their cuteness, and their likeness is being used by their own parents. And legally speaking, throughout most countries across the entire planet, a child has to provide consent for parents to post content of them. But the child cannot provide consent because they are not of age to be able to provide that consent.
Yeah.
So the bottom line is, you just should not be posting anything about your children anywhere. If you do, here's my advice. Have an Instagram account and make it private and only have family or close friends on it. Nobody should see it.
Yeah, very good point. Thanks. And maybe just a last question regarding social media. We have, over the years, as social media came in, I think the first one we got accustomed to was Facebook. And at one stage, I did have a Facebook account, closed it a long time ago. But I don't think everybody knows how to look for accounts that no longer is active, or how to look for an account that's opened in my name that I was not aware of. Is there any advice on how to screen for that? I know obviously there's service at a cost, but is there a way for me to go and browse either via Google or other platform to see what accounts is in my name?
Yeah. So if you know how to conduct searching in a detailed way, an effective way, yes, you can. I think we need to make distinctions between different platforms. So let's use Facebook as one and Twitter as another. Facebook is a platform that only recently, and when I say recently, within 18 months, maybe 2 years, has started allowing people to permanently delete their profiles. Previously, before that, it was deactivation, which would just show a silhouette on a profile picture, which allows you to come back and reactivate it. Then all of your content, posted content, is then available. So we have to make a clear distinction between deactivated and deleted, because there's a very big difference. But one thing we need to remember, even if you've deactivated your account and your posted content on your timeline is not there, your comments on other people's pictures, videos, engagements are still there, and it can still be tied back to you. I do strongly suggest I do an audit on myself once a week. Not just in terms of my profiles. I don't really have to do that purely because I'm not very active. My only real activity is engagement with our company's content and our partners' content. But I do a more thorough search in terms of Google presence for myself. When you look at a platform like Twitter, when you delete your profile and activity is actually still visible in the public domain for 90 days. So we've actually caught a few people out where we've done reports on them. Horrible content on their Twitter, they go and delete it. And then we can actually prove to the client, oh, now they've deleted it, but the content is still there. But we also have the screenshots of the active content that are time-stamped. But yeah, doing a thorough audit on yourself is always advisable, whether you're doing it yourself, if you believe that you have the skill set to be able to do it properly yourself. Please go right ahead. If not, I do recommend getting an independent third party to be able to conduct an assessment on yourself, even if it's just so that you know your own personal baseline. Is there any historical activity that you've engaged in that could be career limiting for you? You don't know, maybe in 5 years' time, you want to start a business, or you have a business and your business, becomes a $1 billion company over the next 3 or 4 years. And then you become like Kevin Hart, who lands a big gig to host the Oscars, and 24 hours later, you're fired because of content from 10 years ago. So, yeah, it is very advisable to do so. But doing so is a very complex process that would take me probably weeks to teach people on how to do it themselves.
Thank you.
Right. If there's any other questions, I'm very happy to address any. I think Dan has been in the chat addressing questions, but if anyone has anything, yeah, I'm very happy to chat.
Farhad, it doesn't seem like there's any questions, but wow, what an insight session. It was really, I was actually stunned by all the stats that you've used. Thank you so much to you and to Servaas as well for sharing your invaluable knowledge and your strategies with us today. I believe it was really just as insightful to anyone else. Your expertise has undoubtedly paved the way for more secure and efficient onboarding practices in our workplaces. And to everyone else who joined us today, thank you for being an active part of this crucial conversation. I believe that together we can take important steps to protect and enhance our work environment. And I think that is then that from us for today. Please reach out to any of us on the call. We will really love to engage with you. Have a good day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mona.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
Farhad.
Bye-bye.